I would not change a thing. I would just allow it to be what it is, because addiction took me to a certain place that I don't want to be anymore. And I can't be anymore. I could never go back. And I'm 100% confident about that. There's just no way. And it's been that way for a long time. So there's a fortitude that I've developed, and there's an inner strength that I've developed, and there's faith that I've developed. All of the things, the disciplines, the consistency, all of it was developed because I had that time in my life where I was addicted.
Welcome back to Holistic Healing with Luam. And today I'm honored to have Daryl Dittmer with me. He is the author of When I Stop Fighting and host of When I Stop Fighting podcast, where he openly shares his powerful journey from addiction and inner turmoil to self-awareness and healing. So get ready to be inspired and learn what happens when we stop fighting ourselves. Welcome, Daryl.
Thank you, Luam. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Good to have you. So, in your memoir, When I Stopped Fighting, you discuss your journey from addiction to inner peace. What was the pivotal moment that led you to seek change?
Well, it was a few moments, and I think, there was a pivotal moment, but it's interesting as we go along this journey, that we call life. There's a whole lot of things that take us in one direction or potentially another direction, and just to sort of round out the story, I was brought up in a religious household and a pretty strict household, and there wasn't a lot of wiggle room. My dad was a mechanic. My mom took care of us kids, and so it was a very tight financially, that sort of thing. And my dad had been in the military, and he was a pretty tough dude. So it was just kind of a strict upbringing, and which is completely fine, just part of my journey. But around 13, I got involved in drinking, and then soon thereafter I got involved in drugs, and I started moving in a direction that was not the way I was raised. And there may be some good reasons for that, which quite honestly um, don't matter, other than for me, I needed to change, and I needed to change my life. So the drinking and the drugs escalated pretty quickly, to the point where when I was 18 years old, my parents basically said I was dealing drugs, and I was stealing, and I was lying, and I was doing other, criminal type activities. And it just wasn't a good scene. And I was headed down the tubes pretty quickly. So they did an intervention, and long story short, I got put into a treatment center just after I turned 19, which was January 3rd of 1985. The pivotal moment for me came December 31st of 1984, which was, I was at a New Year's Eve party, and I knew I was going into treatment in a few days. And I was with, I don't know, a couple hundred people probably. It was a lot of people in a big party, and I had never felt so alone and so just bound up internally, and not knowing where to turn, and feeling very isolated. And that's what I experienced then. And it went through my mind at that point, do I really want to be on this planet anymore? And that was a point where I didn't know it then, but that was a point where I just sort of took a little bounce, and then I went into treatment. And I wasn't planning to listen. I bought a whole bunch of drugs before I went in, and I had them stashed away, and I was ready to start doing them again when I got out. And but I didn't, because in treatment I started to learn some things. So as far as a pivotal moment for me, that was really it. That was whether I knew it then or not, I refer back to that moment as a place that I just never want to be again.
Have you went back and explored what triggered you to go down this path?
I have. Yeah, I definitely have. And, you know, I don't know that there's, for some people, I think there's an answer like, hey, I was abused in this way, or I was treated poorly in this way, or I had a traumatic event or a number of traumatic events. I know I had some of those events in my life, but I don't necessarily attribute those to specifically to the drinking and the drugs. I do believe it was an escape mechanism for me, based on whatever inner turmoil I had at that time. But I can't say it was because of anything specific, quite honestly.
What were your biggest challenges during the earlier stages of your recovery?
The biggest challenges during the early stages were, number one was, they told me when I came into recovery that if you change the game, you got to change the players. And which basically meant I had to get rid of the friends or not associate with the friends that I had had who could potentially influence me to go back to the drinking and drugs. So that was a big one because and I didn't feel any particular closeness necessarily like I feel to people today. It was a different thing. It was partying, and it was getting in trouble, and it was doing dumb things and all that sort of stuff. But at that point in my life, they were my friends, and they were my best friends, and they were the friends that I had. So that was a difficult one. And then the other thing I think that was difficult for me is I got involved in the 12 steps, and just in terms of overcoming addiction and that sort of thing. And I thought that's what it was. Like, okay, the 12 steps is about overcoming drinking or drugs or whatever it is. And they've got a whole bunch of 12-step programs now. But there's only one step that deals with the drinking or the drugs or the food or the gambling or whatever it is. There's only one step that deals with that. The rest of the steps have to do with changing ourselves and changing our lives. And that was a struggle for me. And I think part of it was because I was so young. And they say that when you start drinking and doing drugs, you stop growing emotionally because you're not allowing your emotions to pass through. You're not allowing them to happen. You're just masking them and pushing them down. And I have to agree with that. I believe that to be true. And so from the time I was 13, say to the time I was 19, I don't know that I had grown at all emotionally. So I was feel like I was feeling things for the first time, and I was experiencing these emotions for the first time as far as being an adult. And I didn't know how to deal with some of the things that were coming up. And that was a big challenge for me. And then probably the other challenge was that growing up in a very religious household, I had to pull that whole thing apart. I had to pull my belief system apart and say, okay, so here's all the stuff that I believe. Here's all I liken it to putting everything out on a table. Here's all the stuff I'm going to throw on a table that has to do with making up me. And I had to look at those things and say, okay, what's working and what's not working? What resonates for my life, and what fulfills me, and what can help me find peace and that sort of thing. And it wasn't the religion that I grew up with. It just wasn't for me. And I know it is for a lot of people, and that's cool. I don't, whatever works for anyone, I'm completely fine with. But for me, I had to start thinking more along spiritual lines than religious lines. I had to put away God's this dude up there in the sky with a chalkboard that's writing down everything I do wrong. And if I do enough stuff wrong, I'm going into the fires of damnation forever. Like, that didn't bring me any peace. That didn't bring me any joy. That just scared me. And so my belief system has changed incredibly, but it took a long time to unravel some of the old stuff and start to develop some new systems for what I believe.
It's interesting. So it seems like your spiritual growth is really what aided your recovery.
Absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. I do believe, and you know, I love the title of your podcast, Holistic Healing, because I do believe that it's a journey of body, mind, heart, and soul. But I do believe that any of those we don't attend to can hurt the other ones. And I think the soul, for me, is the most important one that I can attend to in terms of uh, living a life of peace and contentment and fulfillment, regardless of what's happening around me. I have to find that place where I'm okay. And that took me a long time, but yes, it's a huge part of what I believe and how I live my life.
Yeah, for me, I know most people see religion and spirituality as two different things, but I feel like they're intertwined. It's kind of two different ways to get to the same connection. Um, but yeah, I can understand how organized religion can be somewhat restrictive on personal growth.
Yeah, it felt that way to me, and again, nothing wrong, you know, with anything like that. I don't I think whatever works for someone, because I don't there's a there's an interesting little saying that I heard a while ago, and I think it's got some truth to it. But the saying is, and I can't attribute it to a specific person. I'm sorry, I don't remember that, but it said something like there are 5,000 different iterations of God and or religion in the world. And I felt like it was speaking to me, but it said, don't worry, yours is the right one. And so I'm like, oh, well, that kind of brings it around for me. Like whatever a person believes, you know, chances are we all believe that it's a power greater than us. You know, we can call it God, we can call it Allah, we can call it whatever. I don't, that doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is it something that brings me, can I have a personal relationship with that power? And with that power greater than myself. And I 100% believe that I can. I don't, and I feel like that was something that in the religion that I was brought up in, it was okay. The preacher is the person who has the direct connection. You got to get it kind of through the preacher. You don't really get it for yourself, and you have to do all these things to get it. And I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to use the hotline and go direct to the source. And that's what I've been doing now for a long time. And it's the only evidence I have is that, which is the evidence that matters to me is I wake up in the morning with a smile on my face. I'm grateful for everything that's in my life. I'm grateful for the difficult things. I'm grateful for the wonderful, you know, things that feel great and all that stuff. And I love waking up in the morning and I love my life, and that's the evidence to me that it's working. And if I didn't feel like that, I'd have to change something. That's just my belief system.
Got it. What part of your former self or lifestyle did you find hardest to let go, even though you know that it was destructive?
That's a great question. I like that a lot. It was the troublemaker part of me that was probably the hardest to let go of. You know, I got into a fair amount of scrapes and a fair amount of trouble, and I've always been kind of a clown, and it took me a little while to rein that in. And I love the Bible in terms of just the beautiful lessons and writing and teachings, and there's a part in the Bible that says, unless you become like little children, you cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven. And I truly believe that. I believe if I can't or if I'm not exploring and curious and fun loving and all of those things like a child, I can't reach peace and I can't reach contentment. That's how I look at that. And I believe that to be true, but I had to grow up in many ways, and that's the difference between the childish nature of being a troublemaker and then looking at life with the eyes of a child has been a wonderful thing for me, but getting rid of that mentality of troublemaker, took a few years to tamp down, but I'm glad I did.
Now, often addiction for most people is a coping mechanism. What daily practices have you adopted to kind of replace that coping mechanism?
There's several things that I do on an everyday basis that are quote unquote practices. The first thing I do is well, not the absolute first thing, but first thing I do is make my bed because I think that's important. There's a little bit of discipline and consistency in that. The next thing is I do is I read in the morning, and I read books like philosophy and different religions and mythology and all. I just love belief systems. So I fill myself with that sort of thing because all of those things that go in me just sort of ruminate. And then at some point something just pops up like, oh wow, yeah, now I know what they were talking about. So I love to read and I do that every day. But then I come and I do breath work and I face the sun, I face the rising sun, and I do breath work. And that's probably 20 minutes. And then I meditate for probably another 20 to 30 minutes. And then I practice gratitude. I say thank you for everything that I have and everything that shows up in my life. And and I exercise on a daily basis. I normally, with a lot of this stuff, I'll take one day off a week because I feel like we can overwhelm ourselves if we try to be too strict all the time. So I take one day off a week, and then the exercise. And I also do intermittent fasting, which is another daily practice that I do in 18 hours off and 6 hours on in terms of my eating time frame. So those are the things so far. There's probably more coming in terms of things that I'll discover along the way, but those have helped me a lot.
Is your coping mechanism for yours, is it different when you first started versus now, or is it kind of been the same? As in, like, did you need different tools or habits in the beginning versus now, years into your sobriety?
It's very different now, and it for me it's a building over time, and I look at this journey on this planet where we are. For me is I'm building my life, and I'm building my physical life, my mental life, my spiritual life, and my emotional life. And so I'm building all those things as time goes on, and I'm learning more things. And I'm also, as I got older, I got better at consistency and I got better at discipline and I got better at practicing things, on a daily basis or 6 days a week or whatever it was, because it's not easy sometimes, especially when we're young and we're trying to, we have a job and we're maybe building a family and we've got, relationships, and maybe there's a few relationships we've got to put time into and effort into and all this sort of thing. So there's a lot that goes into life, especially when we're younger and we're starting. And I think life kind of smooths a little bit over time, but it's hard to be consistent and it's hard to be as disciplined as we might want to be. I learned how to meditate, 35 years ago, but I haven't been doing it 6 days a week for 35 years, and I think that can be the challenge sometimes is number one, the consistency, but also what are the right practices for me at any given point in time? Because Now it's the breath work and the discipline and, and making my bed and intermittent fasting and exercising and all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't always set up just like that. And I haven't always been just as consistent. So I think there's a leveling up process. And I think we also have to allow ourselves grace to not be perfect. Like, we're not ever going to be perfect. I can do 100 more practices in a day and I'm never going to be perfect, and that's okay. I'm just going to do the best work that I can today for myself and hence for others.
How do you deal with triggers and temptation? Is there any strategy you found effective that can help someone that's new in their sobriety?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that I hang on to, and I've hung on to for a long time, there's a couple things. Number one is, this too shall pass. When we have those desires or those cravings or whatever somebody wants to call it, and it doesn't have to be necessarily addictions. It can be other attachments that we have to
Yeah.
things. So, and I think attachments is a great word because that encompasses a larger universe of the things that we can get stuck on. And so I have to understand that this too shall pass. Just because I'm feeling this now, I might not feel it in 5 minutes. It might go away in 5 minutes unless I chase it. If I have one of those cravings or those emotional sort of attachment things, and I chase it and I allow it to run with me, then I can be in trouble. But if I just allow it to come in and go, the this too shall pass, it'll pass. It truly does, and it passes every single time. It's just a matter of when it'll pass. And I think another thing that's really important, they told me this early on in my recovery, was helping other people. If I find myself in a situation that I'm stuck on something that I want, in attachment or addiction or whatever it is, I can help somebody else. I don't care if it's giving a smile to the person at the grocery store, walking down the sidewalk, whatever it is. Pay attention to someone else, because where I get in trouble is when I get into my own head and about those things, and then it just fuels the fire. If I can get out of myself and help someone else, that'll definitely redirect my energy and help me to get over that craving or that desire.
Yeah. And probably changing your internal dialogue. Because I'm sure when you're going through that rock bottom moment or addiction or whatever it is, you're probably not speaking, your internal dialogue is probably mostly negative, and shifting that to get out of that mind state.
For sure. There's a guy named Jack Boland. He was a minister at a church called the Unity Church in Warren, Michigan. This was many, many, many years ago. And he passed away a long time ago. But he used to say, he had a book and some tapes. That's how old I am. Some tapes about, it was called the 7 Day Mental Diet, and where we just attempt to not allow negative thinking to take us away. And he used to say, when you have those negative thoughts come in, and I've done this 100 times, if not 1,000 times in these years, but we can just say, when that negative thought comes in, just say cancel, cancel, and just cancel it out and let it go away, and redirect our energy somewhere else and redirect our thoughts in a different way. And I think that's great advice also.
Yeah. I know addiction is often seen as in a negative light. Is there anything your addiction gave you that you now appreciate and use positively in your life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I 100% believe, and people ask all the time, and you see it everywhere. I've seen it everywhere. They say, or they ask the question, what would you change in your life if you could change one thing? about your past or whatever, your upbringing. And I said, honestly, not a thing. I would not change a thing. I would just allow it to be what it is because addiction took me to a certain place that I don't want to be anymore. And I can't be anymore. There's just, I could never go back. And I'm 100% confident about that. There's just no way. And it's been that way for a long time. So there's a fortitude that I've developed, and there's an inner strength that I've developed, and there's faith that I've developed. And all of the things, the disciplines, the consistency, all of it was developed because I had that time in my life where I was addicted. Had I not had that time in my life where I was addicted, I have no idea where my life would be. I don't know. I don't know where it would be. I don't know if I would still be in the same place where I grew up. I don't know what I'd be doing. I don't know if I'd have the belief system that I have now. I'm guessing none of those things in terms of what my life would be like. And I truly, truly, truly wake up every day literally, and I love my life, and I want to just go. And all that's because of my past. All of that is because of that time when I was addicted. So I wouldn't trade it for the world. And my entire existence is owed to the time that I had to change.
Yeah, I think I'm a big proponent of everything is happening for you and not to you. So everything happens for a reason. And if you didn't go through this process, you wouldn't be able to help others overcome those challenges through your book or podcast. So, have you used any unconventional methods that you found effective in your recovery process or surprised you in its effectiveness?
Unconventional. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like my life is a series of unconventional things because it's not what I was what I grew up to be. I'm not what I was. My mom said when I was a kid, she's like, I think you should be either a preacher or a doctor. And neither of those two things happened. And none of my family had gone to college or graduated from college. Like nobody had until I was able to go to college, for which I am very grateful. But it would have been really hard to be a doctor if we didn't have doctors, in my family. So it was just kind of it was an interesting thing to hear that from my mom. But I think she just wanted the best for me, which was a cool thing. But so unconventional. I mean, I haven't done anything like alternative methods in terms of uh, other drugs, or there's things that they give people who are addicted to try to get them off of things. And I haven't done any of that sort of thing. I do feel like I live on the edge of convention because I don't ascribe myself to the belief systems of groups or others, or whether it's religious or political or anything like that. I just don't. I don't put a label on Daryl. Daryl is what he is from day to day. And I don't join the groups like that in terms of like, oh, here's what my belief system is. Even the 12 steps. And the 12 steps changed me immensely, but I stopped going to those meetings probably 30 years ago, and not for any particular reason, but it's easy to get hemmed into a belief system that that we don't allow ourselves the freedom to believe anything else. And I think that's a really crucial part of life, is to allow ourselves the freedom to believe things that may not be mainstream and may not be how we grew up, or may not be what the group thinks we should believe. But I do believe the more that I define and the more that I join, the more that I limit what my entire life can be, if I just open it up to whatever the universe has to offer. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does. What message of hope would you offer to someone who's currently feeling stuck or hopeless and battling with addiction? Is there any words of wisdom you'd like to leave them with?
Yes, for sure. And I'm particularly, there's a lot of young people who can get stuck with attachments and addiction and things that they just get mired in. And that's who I really want to try to get my message to. And part of my message has to do with a story that I love. And when I first started going around, I was 19 years old at the time. I first started going around the 12 step tables. They always have coffee, and there's, it just is this place where, it's kind of a refuge. And it was a refuge for me at that age because it was a place I could go that was pretty safe in terms of I wasn't going to be uh, tempted to do some of the things that I had done before. So I'm at one of these meetings. It's a Friday night meeting, and it's at a place called the Community Center, and we're there in a nearby city, and we're there, and every Friday night we would go to this meeting, and it was a pretty big meeting. I think maybe a couple hundred people, and there was this older gentleman there, and he was slight in stature, and he kind of walked a little bent over, and he looked like he may be in some pain and that sort of thing, and his name was Jimmy, and he was 40 years sober at that time. So we looked at him like a deity. We're all a few months sober, like, oh, Jimmy, he's just like this ultra cool, seemingly peaceful, just wise man. But Jimmy would get up in those meetings, and he would fill the coffee pot, and he would go around and fill people's coffee cups. And he's like 40 years sober. We're like, what's going on? Everybody else should be doing that, not Jimmy, but he was very service oriented, and he was very caring toward others, and he was always trying to give. And that really hit me. But one of the things that he used to say, and this is my message for people who may be stuck or need to look at some change in their life. Jimmy used to say, if you want to recover and you want to move forward in your life, you have to learn how to stay small. And what I got out of that was, and this is what he meant stay humble, stay teachable, be open to learning. We don't know it all, no matter how much information we have or knowledge we have, or, spiritual awakenings or anything like that. We don't know it all, and we never will. And to be open to learning, and to be open to understanding new things, and open to changing what we think about things and changing ourselves, then we'll really get somewhere. And I think that's really important for somebody starting out, to just surrender and say, you know what, I don't know how to do it. Somebody please help me. And then go find that help, and allow it to help you.
Yeah, I think that's a good advice for life in general.
Yeah, I think so too. I think about it all the time.
Yeah. Do you feel like mentorship and having a community is a significant part in helping you with recovery?
I do, and I think especially early on, I've had mentors my whole life, and some wonderful mentors, in terms of, when I first started on this journey, and they were absolutely indispensable to me. And one of the reasons I titled my book When I Stopped Fighting, I'll just tell a quick little story. My first mentor, and his name was Bud, as he watched me, and I grew up with that fighting mentality, fighting life, fighting problems. They tell you now, fight disease, fight this, fight that. Everybody just fight stuff. And that was what I grew up with. And Bud said to me, as he watched me wrestling with problems and fighting and gritting my teeth and all that sort of thing, he's like, Daryl, when you stop fighting, the fighting stops. And I was like, oh, so that's how it works. And that was, I heard that when I was a kid. So it didn't mean as much to me then as it does now. But the real battle that we all have is with ourselves.
Yeah.
And when I stop fighting me, that fight can stop. And if I stop fighting me in certain moments, then that fight can start to just slow down. So I think mentorship is huge, and I also think community is huge. And it doesn't have to be any particular community. It can be any community that works. And it can be 12 steps, it can be church, it can be another spiritual sort of group, it can be a support group, it can be a number of different things, whatever works to help us just sort of climb that fence to a different place in life and starting to think differently about things to the point where we feel like we can sustain change and we start to really want change. Community and mentorship is indispensable.
Well, Daryl, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Before we close it out, is there anything you wanted to leave the listeners with?
Thank you, Luam. And thank you so much for having me on. I think it's so important, and I've heard this in every aspect of life, and no matter what anybody is struggling with or trying to overcome or achieve. Sometimes we get stuck on hey, I'm not where I want to be professionally or whatever, and we can get stuck on that sort of thing. And really the key to all of it is, and I found this for myself because there's many times along many roads in this life where I've wanted to just throw up my hands and give up and just not do the hard stuff and not want to continue. And that's the advice that I would give to anyone is, I heard a saying a long time ago, don't quit before the miracle. And I believe that's absolutely true because there's many times when I thought, you know what, I'm just about to give up, and then something really cool happens. So just don't give up. Keep going, and I promise better things are coming.
Really great advice. Again, Daryl, I really appreciate you for coming on the podcast and giving us some insight and wisdom. And for the listeners, I'll have his information in the description. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Luam. I appreciate it.